Hi guys, welcome back to Nyx Reads. Thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to subscribe if you love watching bookish videos. And let me know what you think of my new and improved filming setup. I decided to move here so you guys can actually see my color coordinated bookshelf. I think it's quite pretty. Last month I read a total of 7 books, but as usual, if you're curious to see how much money I saved by using my beloved library card, stay until the end. 3 of the books I'm only going to briefly gloss over because my reading project that I had going on last month was to read from 4 authors that I have previously loved. I gave 4 or 5 stars to, but for some reason I never picked up a new book or a new series by them. So it was part of my 2024 reading goals to read something from those 4 authors, and I basically got it out of the way right in February. 3 out of the 4 I did finish in February. So I read The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, Challenger Deep by Neal Shusterman, and My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. With these 3 books, I had 2 wins. One was almost a complete 5 stars, and one was a super fail. So if you're curious to see what my reviews are and what I thought about each book, then why don't you watch my video? The Woman in Cabin 10 is a thriller that takes place on a cruise ship. My Year of Rest and Relaxation is something like a very dark character study with a very unlikable narrator. And Challenger Deep is a YA story about a teenager who has a mental illness. There's one more book to briefly mention. It is I Know Why the Caged Birds Sing by Maya Angelou. Now, I checked this out from my Libby app from the library as an audiobook, and I started listening to it. Maya Angelou narrates the audiobook herself, which usually I find fantastic when the author does that. But in this case, because English is not my first language, and she speaks with kind of this, I don't know if you would call it a southern drawl, but with some type of accent in her English that I just couldn't understand very well. So I returned the audiobook to the library, and what I'm gonna do is just buy a physical copy because there's no way I'm gonna listen to this audiobook and not be happy with my experience and give it like a 2 or 3 stars, when in reality this probably has the potential to be a 4 if not 5 stars. So I wanted to give this book a fair shot because I know that it's an important work of literature. So this is like a temporary DNF, but I have all the intentions to pick it back up, but as a physical copy. For the remaining books, I'm gonna follow my usual pattern of going from worst to best rated. So I read TikTok famous book, A Murder in the Family by Cara Hunter. The kind of book where you read it and you have to follow along and figure out if you catch the murderer by yourself before you get to the end of the book. You can see that it's kind of like a mixed media type of approach. And technically this is like a script. One of our main characters is Guy Howard. He's a filmmaker. And when he was young, his stepfather died of very mysterious circumstances. This takes place in the UK, and it was never really solved. And now he actually creates a true crime series out of his life story. It is within the episodes of this series that this cold case is being attempted to be cracked open and solved after so many years. While this ended up being only a 3 stars for me, and I'll get into the details of why this wasn't a favorite, I had such a fun time reading this. I read this together with my boyfriend. So I used the physical copy, and then I was able to check out an ebook from the library, and he read it on my iPad. Instead of watching our, evening Netflix Crave Disney Plus show together, an episode of that, we would instead read a chapter together of this book, and 1 chapter equals 1 episode. We would kind of discuss it, and it was honestly such a fun thing to do. So even just for that, I would really recommend this. I think this is such a great alternative to watching a TV show together. I don't think that this makes a good book club book because the fun of it is to read it simultaneously and discuss it while you're reading it. So maybe on Discord, if you have like a group for every chapter so you don't spoil yourself accidentally, but I don't think it's really worth it to just like have a big discussion when you finish it, because at that point all is said and done. Now the mystery itself, I was not a big fan of because first of all, there were so many far-fetched scenarios in this book where things just get revealed out of complete nowhere, and at that point it can literally be anything because there's no hints about them. They just come out of left field. That being said, I don't like true crime. I can't stomach it, so I don't really watch true crime, which is why I don't know if those kind of shows usually are like that. The other thing is, you're in a room with these 6 experts basically that get interviewed, yet there's an incredible amount of speculation without actual evidence. Also, there are so many red herrings and fluff, but in a way that it feels very unnatural, like you know that you're being laid astray at that point. It also didn't help that my boyfriend and I figured out pretty much exactly what happened way too early into the story, like way too early. I don't want to say the page number, because if I say the page number, it's basically going to be a spoiler. All right, like if you're maybe in the middle of the book. So it's a no for the mystery itself for me, but it is a win for the experience of reading this book with somebody together. Next up, also with 3 stars, is Small Worlds by Caleb Azumah Nelson. This is a new release. I listened to this as audiobook. The narrator did a fantastic job. I read Open Waters by this author, and I think that was his debut novel, which I loved. I know some people love finding an author where they like their prose, the characters, the storylines, and then the author writes other books that are quite similar, and you as the reader maybe are super happy because you know what to expect. But in this case, it was too close for me. I felt like I was almost reading the same story in a slightly different format, which means the elements that I did like, I also did like in the first book. So for example, the author uses a lot of recurring names and phrases, which can sound very lyrical, and the prose itself is very poetic. It's like song lyrics. The male protagonist shows an incredible amount of vulnerability in this book. We learn a lot about his very deep aspirations, his fear, about his family. There's a lot of culture in this book, also from the Black community. Black Lives Matter is an issue that is in the forefront of this book. We also have a lot of music, a lot of food. It's a very brightly painted picture. So if that sounds good to you, I would still recommend you to pick this up, but for some reason for me in that moment it just didn't work. Maybe I should have just read this in the summer, because like the first one, this really felt like a slow, hazy, lazy summer day in a way. I don't know how else to describe it, but this is the feeling that Caleb Azumah Nelson's writing gives me. So my dislike about this book is that it felt too close to the first one. But on the other hand, if you loved Open Waters and you want to find something just like that with the same type of power and story, then honestly, you cannot go wrong with picking up Small Worlds. Next up with 4 stars, I listened to A Series of Unfortunate Events, The Bad Beginning by Lemony's Snicket. Now, this has a special place in my heart because the movie with Jim Carrey that features the first 3 books, there's 12 in total in this middle grade series. I watched it numerous times. We used to have the DVD at home. This is the reread. I already read this book when I first bought this copy. I chose the audiobook because my sister was listening to it, and I said, why not? I'm gonna do it as well. So I'm probably gonna be reading all 12 books in this middle grade series this year. If you don't know what this book is about, it's about the 3 Baudelaire kids, or orphans. So we have Violet, Klaus, and Sunny. Violet is the oldest at 14. Sunny is only an infant. Their parents tragically pass away in the very beginning of book 1. And for some odd reason, they get left at these very far away relatives. And one of them is Count Olaf. And Count Olaf is a bad guy. He's a villain. All he wants is to inherit the huge Baudelaire fortune, and he basically will stop at nothing to do so. Now, this is a very specific type of flavor of book because, first of all, this is very self-aware. This has a lot of metacontextual elements in it. It's like the author is a persona himself. The author will directly talk to his reader and either do explanations or do some foreshadowing or warn you about certain parts that will happen later on in the book. There's a reoccurring theme in this also of extremely ignorant adults. So the adults in this series are basically useless, which leaves the kids to fend for themselves and which leads you, the reader, to be super worried about them. So the setting of this is like this Victorian, bleak, gray world where it's a bit surreal. It's great. It's so dark for a middle grade, and yet it is very playful, and I just absolutely love the meta elements in here. And lastly, Circe by Madeline Miller. I gave this 4 stars in the end. There were times where I thought this is only going to be a 3, but this is one of the books where the more I thought about it afterwards, the more I saw how brilliantly this book was written and how much I actually did like it. This was a buddy read with my sister, and I think we had very similar feelings about this. So Circe in Greek mythology is a daughter of one of the Titans, and her mom is a nymph. I haven't read the Iliad or the Odyssey, so I don't know if she plays a big part in the original material. What makes this book so special is that because she's the main character, this story gets this feminist, independent, sexually free spin on this woman, well, goddess. What I really like is that in this story, there's a lot of women, or goddesses I should say, that make a bunch of very cruel decisions, and they do awful things to each other. And I really like that, because I think in most, if not all, old stories like this, usually goddesses and women, they don't make their own decisions. The gods make a decision for them, or the fates, and then they're just the poor victims of whatever, you know, fate or circumstance happens to them, and then they have to deal with it, and most of the time they're punished for something. Whereas in this story, they have agency. A fantastic example of that would be Circe's sister Pasiphae. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. There's a few chapters where we follow parts of what she's doing, and there was a few elements in there that I didn't quite understand, so I googled her and to see what high level her story is about. It was interesting because pretty much all of the summaries that I read through, they were all telling the story of Pasiphae basically, once again, being at the mercy of the will and the arbitrary wants and needs and of the games of the other gods. Whereas in this book, there's a clear motivation for her actions, why she does what she does, and there's a clear reason behind it. For her, it's in this book, Pasiphae, she's doing this power grab, but it was not pictured that way when I was looking it up on random articles. I went into this completely blind. I didn't know who Circe is, what her story is, so I'm also not going to give too much away here. Basically, something happens and she's being exiled to an island, and this is where we follow her story. Sometimes it did feel like the story was going on forever. In the end, I was like, you know what? It kind of fits with the story because she is a goddess. Her story is going on forever at this moment, so maybe it is supposed to be this slow. But that's one of the reasons why first I was like, okay, I think this is not quite for me, because I mean, this book is not that long. It's under 400 pages and sometimes felt like I was reading a 600-page book. I really liked how the author captures the inhumanness of these gods and titans, the way Madeline Miller describes them and describes how they even look like. Once again, I loved the depiction of Circe in here as this independent, sexually free woman, and I think in a lot of paintings and poems and, you know, other variations of this story, she's kind of like a bad temptress, like a bad woman. Odysseus also plays a big part in this story, and I like in general how in this book we don't put heroes on a pedestal and are just in awe of everything that they did. We look at them as humans, and we look at how cruel these men were and everything that they sacrificed. A lot of the things they didn't sacrifice themselves. They sacrificed their families, their wives, their children in a way. Maybe these men weren't heroes. Maybe they just had a huge ego and this is why they did what they did. It is not as good, in my opinion, as the Song of Achilles, because that one is truly one of my favorite literary love stories. This is not so much a love story. It is really just more about following Circe in her life, and she has an amazing character arc. The woman or goddess that she is in the beginning of the story, it's not the same goddess that we look at the end of the story. So the story unfolds also more in story by story by story type of way. On a side note, I heard a lot of buzz and great things about the Iliad's new translation by Emily Wilson. Apparently it is more feminist than earlier translations. Don't quote me on that, but I think at some point I do want to read the Iliad. I mean, it's probably one of the great books that you can read in your lifetime, so not anytime soon though. So that was all the books I read in February. Now, by using my library card, I saved a total of $81.84 Canadian before taxes. If you don't have a library card yet, it's new year, new you. If you want to let me know that you're still watching, why don't you leave me some kind of Greek mythology inspired emoji? You can be as creative as you want. Don't forget to let me know if there are any books that you recommend to me, or let me know what your best book of February was. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you love bookish videos, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.